A young girl, looking like she didn't belong, walks into the most powerful skyscraper in the city, clutching a sweat-stained envelope in her hands. No one takes her seriously until she silently holds her ground in the face of laughter from the well-dressed adults around her. The richest man in the country reaches out, opens the letter, and the past tears him apart from the inside. If this beautiful story of overcoming adversity and love has you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now for the full story. Lauren clutched the envelope so tightly, her small knuckles turned white. The 9-year-old girl hurried through the streets of Midtown Manhattan, her worn-out sneakers slapping against the hot asphalt on that July afternoon. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat dripped from her forehead, soaking the brown strands of hair escaping from her messy ponytail. She didn't have money for the bus, so she'd walked for over an hour from the Bronx, counting the blocks, memorizing the route her mother had shown her just once, months ago, back when there was still hope things might get better. The envelope was crumpled at the edges, but Lauren protected the center carefully, as if that piece of paper was the last valuable thing her family owned. And maybe it was. Inside was a letter written by her mother in neat cursive, every word mulled over during sleepless nights, every sentence rewritten dozens of times until it was perfect. Jessica had folded the paper with trembling hands the night before, kissed her daughter's forehead, and whispered that this was their last chance. In the small apartment where they lived, or rather, the cramped 2-room unit in a run-down building on the outskirts of the city, there wasn't enough food left. The beans had run out last week, the rice was being rationed. Jessica had sold her phone, then the old stove that still worked, then the last few pieces of jewelry left from Lauren's grandmother. All of it to pay the overdue rent and avoid the eviction the landlord had been threatening for 2 months. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Lauren knew every detail of their struggle. She saw her mom leave before sunrise to work as a housekeeper in faraway homes, returning late at night with an aching back and eyes, red with exhaustion. She saw Jessica split her plate of food and lie about not being hungry, pushing the larger portion toward Lauren. She saw the strong, hard-working woman who had raised her daughter alone since her father abandoned them, now shrinking in shame whenever the landlord knocked on the door, demanding money they no longer had. The building loomed ahead like a fortress of glass and steel, reflecting the blue sky in a way that hurt her eyes. It was the Caldwell Tower, headquarters of the state's largest real estate development firm, and Lauren's stomach churned as she stopped. In front of the entrance, people in expensive suits rushed in and out, talking on their phones, carrying leather briefcases. No one looked around. No one saw the skinny girl in faded clothes standing there, clutching an envelope to her chest. Lauren took a deep breath. Her mother had told her to deliver the letter directly into the hands of Robert Caldwell. She couldn't leave it with the reception desk, couldn't trust any assistance. It had to be in person. Jessica hadn't explained why. She had just held her daughter's face in her hands and repeated it like a desperate command. The girl pushed through the revolving door and into the frigid lobby. The air conditioning hit her sweaty face, making her shiver. The place was immense, with soaring ceilings, gleaming marble floors, and a giant chandelier hanging from the center. Behind the reception desk, 3 women in impeccable uniforms were helping visitors with professional smiles. Lauren approached slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze that turned in her direction. One of the receptionists looked up and frowned when she saw the little girl. Lauren got closer and placed the envelope on the counter. "I need to give this to Mr. Robert Caldwell," she said in a firm voice, just as she had practiced. The woman glanced at the crumpled envelope, then at Lauren, and her face hardened into a look of poorly disguised contempt. "Mr. Caldwell doesn't accept mail here. You can leave it with us and we'll forward it." "No," Lauren insisted. "I have to give it to him myself. It's important." The receptionist let out a short, humorless laugh. "Listen, kid, Mr. Caldwell owns this company. He doesn't just meet with anyone who shows up with a letter. If it's urgent, you can—" "I'm not leaving until I give it to him," Lauren interrupted, her voice louder than she intended. People around them started to stare. "I need to talk to him." The second receptionist walked over, assessing the situation. Her smile was cold. "Honey, do you know where you are? This isn't a playground. If you don't have real business here, you should go home." "I do have real business," Lauren felt tears burning in her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "This letter is important. My mom said he needs to read it." The two women exchanged a look. One of them picked up the phone and murmured something. Within seconds, two security guards approached, large men in black suits with earpieces. Lauren took a step back, but didn't let go of the envelope. "Let's go, kid. No trouble," one of them said, his voice deep. "You need to leave." "I just want to deliver the letter." "You think you can just walk in here and demand to see the CEO?" The receptionist laughed, and a few people nearby chuckled. "Where do you think you are?" The humiliation burned like fire. Lauren felt the stares of pity and mockery, heard the whispered comments about clueless people and a rude kid. But she thought of her mother, of the empty pantry, of the threat of eviction. She thought of Jessica crying silently in the bathroom, trying not to make a sound so she wouldn't scare her daughter. "Please," she tried one more time, her voice breaking. "Just give it to him, that's all." The receptionist snatched the envelope from Lauren's hand with a sharp gesture, just to shut her up. "Fine, we'll deliver it," she said with irony, making air quotes. She tossed the envelope into a box behind the counter, where dozens of other papers were piled. "There, now go." Lauren knew that envelope would never reach Robert Caldwell. She knew that as soon as she left, the woman would throw it in the trash. The certainty made her take another step forward. "You're not going to give it to him. I know you're not." "Kid, that's enough. You're causing a scene." The guard placed a hand on her shoulder, not forcefully but firmly. "Let's go outside." It was at that moment that the doors to the executive elevator opened. A group of men in suits emerged, all walking quickly, surrounding a central figure. Robert. Caldwell was 52, with graying hair slicked back, a serious face and an upright posture. He wore an impeccable grey suit and was talking on his phone as he walked, his assistants beside him jotting down every word he uttered. He was the kind of man who commanded a room just by his presence, and the entire lobby seemed to straighten up as he passed. Lauren saw her chance and didn't think twice. She broke free from the guard and ran toward the group, her sneakers squeaking on the marble, the sound echoing through the hall. "Mr. Caldwell," she yelled, her childish voice cutting through the polite murmur of the lobby. "Mr. Caldwell, please." Everyone stopped. The assistants turned, scandalized. The security guards rushed after her. Robert Caldwell slowly hung up his phone and looked down at the child in simple clothes with a sweaty face and desperate eyes. "What's going on here?" His voice was calm, but it carried authority. "Sir, I'm so sorry for the disturbance," one of the receptionists hurried to explain, laughing nervously. "It's just a girl who showed up wanting to deliver a letter. We're handling it." Robert looked at Lauren. She was breathing hard, her heart pounding so fast it felt like it would explode. "I need to give this to you, sir," Lauren said, holding out her empty hand and realizing the receptionist had the envelope. "It's from my mom. She said you need to read it." Robert raised an eyebrow. He gestured, and one of his assistants went to retrieve the envelope. When he took it in his hands, Lauren saw the change. It was subtle, but it happened. His fingers tightened on the paper, his eyes fixed on the back of the envelope, where his name was written in cursive, and below it a signature. Just a signature, no full name. The color drained from Robert Caldwell's face. His lips pressed into a thin line. For 3 long seconds, he stood completely still, as if he'd seen a ghost. His assistants noticed the shift and exchanged confused glances. "Sir?" one of them asked quietly. Robert didn't answer. He turned the envelope over in his hands, looked at Lauren again, and this time his gaze wasn't one of authority. It was one of shock, of recognition, of something that looked like fear. "Where did you get this?" His voice came out hoarse. "My mom wrote it," Lauren replied. "She said you'd understand when you saw it." Robert closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he gave a series of quick orders. "Take her to my office. Now. And no one says a word about this to anyone." The assistants were dumbfounded. The receptionists turned pale. The security guards released Lauren immediately, as if she had just caught fire. The girl, still processing what was happening, was gently guided to the executive elevator. Robert followed her in, the envelope clutched in his hand, his face shut like a locked door. The elevator doors closed. In the reflection of the polished metal, Lauren saw the most powerful man she had ever seen open the letter with hands that were trembling, and as he read the first few lines, his breath caught. Outside, in the lobby, the silence was absolute. No one was laughing anymore. Robert Caldwell's office took up the entire top floor of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed New York City spread out like a carpet of concrete and glass, but Lauren could barely look outside. She was sitting in a leather armchair so large her feet didn't touch the floor, her sweaty hands clasped in her lap. Across the immense dark wood desk, Robert was reading the letter for the third time. His face was a mask of control, but Lauren saw the cracks, the muscle twitching in his jaw, the white knuckles gripping the paper, the way he took a deep breath before each paragraph. The letter wasn't long. Jessica had chosen each word carefully, without beating around the bush, without unnecessary pleas. It explained the poverty they lived in, her prolonged unemployment, the threat of eviction. But it didn't ask for a handout, it asked Robert to honor an old promise, an agreement made years ago when he wasn't yet the powerful man he had become. And then came the detail that changed everything. The signature. That cursive script Robert would recognize anywhere, even after so many years of trying to forget. "How's your mother?" he finally asked, placing the letter on the desk and taking off his reading glasses. His voice was careful, measured. "Tired," Lauren answered honestly. "She works a lot, but it's never enough. The money runs out before the end of the month." Robert nodded slowly. He stood up from his chair and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. He stood there for a long time, looking out at the city he had conquered. Lauren didn't know if she should speak or wait. The tension in the air was as thick as fog. "Do you know who I am?" he asked without turning around. "You're the owner of this company. My mum said you're very important. And did she tell you why she sent you here? Why she didn't come herself?" Lauren hesitated. Jessica hadn't explained everything, only that Robert needed to see the letter, that he would understand, but there had been something else in her mother's voice that morning, something Lauren couldn't name. Fear, maybe. Or shame. "She said you would listen to me, that I had to be brave." Robert let out a sound that could have been a laugh or a bitter sigh. He returned to his desk and picked up the intercom, pressing a button. "Michael, I need a car ready now. Private address, and I want total discretion. No company driver, no security. You drive." He hung up before his assistant could ask any questions. Lauren watched him with wide eyes. "I'm taking you." "Home?" Robert said, but he wasn't looking at her when he spoke. "And I'm going to talk to your mother." The drive to the Bronx was silent. Robert drove a discreet black sedan, without the special license plates or armored windows he normally used. Lauren was in the back seat, buckled in, watching the scenery gradually change. The elegant skyscrapers gave way to simpler buildings, then to houses packed tightly together, until they reached an area where the streets were cracked and the low-income apartment buildings stood on uneven lots. "It's over there," Lauren pointed to a narrow side street. Robert parked the car and looked around with an expression she couldn't decipher. He had never been here. This world was as distant from his as the moon. Jessica was in the tiny shared backyard, hanging clothes on a line. When she saw the car pull up, she dropped a sheet on the ground. When she saw who got out of the car, her legs nearly gave out. Lauren ran to her. "Mom, I did it! He read the letter!" But Jessica wasn't looking at her daughter. She was staring at Robert Caldwell as if she was seeing a ghost, a man who belonged to a previous life, one buried under years of silence. Robert stopped 10 feet away from her, his hands in his pockets, his face carefully neutral. "Jessica," he said her name slowly, testing it on his tongue. "Robert," she managed to reply, her voice hoarse. "You shouldn't have come. You sent your daughter to me with that letter. What did you expect me to do?" "I expected you to send money, not to come here." Lauren looked from one to the other, trying to understand the invisible current that connected them. There was history there, secrets, things that had happened before she existed. Jessica wiped her face, brushing away the tears that were starting to fall. "Come inside," she said finally. "We can't talk out here." The apartment had 2 rooms. One served as a kitchen and living room with a 2-burner hot plate, an old refrigerator and a plastic table. The other was the bedroom she and her daughter shared, with a double bed and a mattress on the floor. Robert looked around, and something in his face broke. It wasn't pity. It was the recognition of an injustice he had helped create. "Lauren, go. Play outside," Jessica said softly. "But Mom—" "Now, sweetie, please." Lauren reluctantly obeyed, going out to the backyard and sitting on the back stoop, where she could still hear the muffled voices from inside. She didn't understand everything, but she caught snippets. "You promised. I didn't know, all these years, and you left me." Inside the apartment, Jessica and Robert were sitting across from each other at the small plastic table. She had served coffee in mismatched mugs, an automatic gesture of hospitality even in poverty. "I looked for you," Jessica began, her voice trembling but firm. "When I found out. I was pregnant, I tried to find you. I went to your old company, that small construction firm where you used to work. They told me you had left, that you'd started your own business. I asked for your contact info, but no one would give it to me." Robert closed his eyes. He remembered that time, when he was still building his empire, when he cut all ties to his past so he could climb without any baggage. "I didn't know, Jessica. You have to believe me." "You didn't know?" She laughed humorlessly. "Or you didn't want to know? You vanished, Robert. Changed your number, changed your address. It was like I never existed. We weren't serious. It was a few months, you knew that." "I knew. But you also knew I was different from the others, that I thought there was something real between us, and when I got pregnant, you just disappeared." Jessica wiped away her tears angrily. "I raised Lauren alone, Robert, alone. And I never spoke ill of you to her, never told her who you really were, because I didn't think you even deserved to be mentioned." Robert looked down at his own hands. They had built skyscrapers, signed multi-million-dollar contracts, shaken hands with governors, but they had never held the daughter he didn't know he had. "Why now?" he asked. "After all these years? Why did you decide to find me?" "Because I'm cornered. Because they're going to kick us out in 2 weeks if I don't pay 3 months of back rent. Because my daughter is going hungry and I've already sold everything I own. This isn't about pride, Robert. It's desperation." He took a deep breath. The letter mentioned money, but it also spoke of promises. Jessica had written something. Only the two of them would understand. A reference to a specific night 15 years ago, when he swore he would take care of her if she ever needed him. It was a drunken, late-night promise, made after they'd made love. He barely remembered the exact words, but the signature on the letter was the proof. She had kept a piece of paper where he'd written that promise, a piece of paper he thought she had thrown away years ago. "You kept it?" he asked, incredulous. "It was the only thing I had of you. I kept it because I thought I might need it one day. And I did." Robert stood up and walked to the small window that looked out onto the backyard. He saw Lauren sitting out there, poking at the dirt with a stick, lost in childish thoughts. It was the first time he had looked at her knowing the truth, and what he felt was so intense he had to lean against the wall. Shame, guilt, and something more dangerous, a desire to fix it. "I'm going to help you," he said, turning back to Jessica. "I'll pay the rent. I'll give you enough money to get back on your feet. I don't want a handout. It's not a handout. It's the least I can do." "The least?" Jessica stood up, her voice cracking. "The least would have been to stay. The least would have been to answer when I tried to find you. The least would have been to be a father." The words cut like blades. Robert had no defense. Every accusation was true. "I know," he said quietly. "I know there's no forgiving this. But let me try. Let me get to know her. Let me be present now, even if it's too late." Jessica stared at him for a long time. There was anger there and hurt, but there was also exhaustion, the exhaustion of carrying everything alone for too long. "She doesn't know," Jessica whispered. "Lauren doesn't know you're her father. I never told her." Robert felt the floor drop out from under him. "What do you mean she doesn't know?" "Because I didn't think you deserved to be called Dad. Because I didn't want her to grow up waiting for someone who was never going to come." Jessica wiped her eyes. "And now you show up here wanting—" To fix things, but this isn't something you can just fix overnight. So what do you want from me? Just money and then I disappear again? I don't know what I want, she yelled, and her voice echoed in the small apartment. Outside, Lauren looked up. I just know that I'm tired, Robert. Tired of being strong, tired of pretending everything is okay. And when I saw your name in the paper, when I saw you'd become such an important man, I thought, he can help. Even if he hates me, even if he wants nothing to do with me, he can help his daughter. His daughter. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Robert sank back into the chair and put his face in his hands. He stayed like that for a full minute, processing everything. When he looked up again, there was determination in his eyes. I'm going to do more than give you money. I'm getting you out of here. I'll find you a decent place to live. I'll make sure Lauren has an education, food, everything she needs. And in return? In return for nothing. I'm not negotiating, Jessica. I'm taking responsibility for something. I should have taken on 9 years ago. Jessica wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught her to be wary of promises. Still, she looked around the cramped apartment, at the miserable life she was offering her daughter, and knew she had no choice. And what about Lauren knowing the truth? Robert hesitated. When the time is right. First, let me prove I deserve to be in her life. Then we'll tell her. Outside, Lauren heard footsteps and stood up. When the door opened, she saw her mother with red eyes and Robert Caldwell with an expression she had never seen on an adult before, something between hope and terror. Jessica's first day at Caldwell Development was a test of endurance. She arrived at 7 in the morning, wearing the only business-casual outfit she could afford with the advance Robert had deposited, a simple pair of black slacks and a white blouse that was a little too loose. Her shoes were old but clean, and she had spent the previous night watching videos on a neighbor's borrowed phone about how to behave in a corporate environment. The receptionist who had mocked Lauren the week before turned pale when she saw Jessica walk in. The woman tried to smile, but her discomfort was obvious. Jessica said nothing, just showed the new ID badge Robert had arranged for and headed to the executive elevator. She could feel eyes burning into her back, the whispers starting before the doors even closed. On the executive floor, a woman in a grey pantsuit and high heels was waiting for her. Catherine Miller, the head of human resources, was 40, with black hair pulled into a perfect bun and an expression that mixed suspicion with poorly concealed irritation. Jessica Williams. She extended a hand, but the handshake was cold. I'm Catherine. I'll be orienting you on your duties. Jessica followed Catherine through wide corridors, past glass-walled conference rooms where executives discussed multi-million-dollar deals. Everything there screamed money and power, and Jessica felt like an intruder, as if at any moment someone would realize the mistake and send her away. Your desk is here, Catherine said, stopping at a small desk next to the door to Robert's office. You'll be responsible for managing his schedule, screening calls, preparing documents, and anything else he needs. The specific instructions are in this manual. She handed over a thick binder. Jessica took it, feeling its weight. I have to say, your hiring was unusual, Catherine continued, crossing her arms. Mr. Caldwell has never hired an assistant without going through the standard recruitment process, so a lot of people are curious about you. The message was clear. She was being watched. Jessica nodded, trying to remain calm. I'll do my best. I hope so. Catherine turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, and Mrs. Melissa Caldwell will be here this afternoon. She always visits her husband on Thursdays. I suggest you be especially professional. The name hit Jessica like a slap. Melissa. The woman Robert had married shortly after leaving her. The legitimate wife, the one with the last name, the life. Everything Jessica never had. She swallowed hard and nodded again. When she was alone, Jessica sat in the new chair and looked around. The desk had a computer, a phone, an empty inbox tray. It was all so different from what she knew. Her hands, calloused from years of cleaning houses, felt alien on the pristine keyboard. She opened the manual and started to read. The first few hours were a blur, but she had a knack for learning quickly that surprised even herself. When the phone rang for the first time, she answered with a trembling but professional voice. When Robert came out of his office and asked for coffee, she brought it exactly how he liked it without having to ask, because she had paid attention to the details in the letter she wrote, remembering everything about him. Robert noticed. He didn't say anything, but his eyes lingered on her for a second too long, and there was something there Jessica couldn't decipher. Gratitude, guilt, or just the heavy conscience of a man, finally, facing the consequences of his choices. The office ran like a well-oiled machine, but Jessica soon noticed the cracks. The other assistants avoided her. When she entered the break room, conversations would stop. When she asked for help understanding a system, the answers were short and impatient. She was an outsider, and everyone wanted her to know it. At lunchtime, Jessica ate alone in the company cafeteria. Other female employees whispered at nearby tables, casting glances in her direction. Jessica pretended not to notice, but every quiet laugh was a small humiliation. It was at 3 in the afternoon that Melissa Caldwell arrived. Jessica saw her first through the glass. Melissa was 45 but looked younger. She had perfectly styled blonde hair, a designer dress, and a handbag that probably cost more than Jessica earned in 6 months. She walked onto the executive floor with the confidence of someone who belonged there, greeting employees by name, smiling with a practiced elegance. When Melissa stopped in front of Jessica's desk, her smile faltered. "You're new," she said, her voice soft but appraising. "I don't remember seeing you before." Jessica stood up, trying not to show the nervousness that was consuming her. "I started today. I'm Mr. Caldwell's new personal assistant." Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly. "Personal assistant? How interesting. My husband didn't mention he was hiring." She tilted her head, studying Jessica with an attention that bordered on uncomfortable. "What was your name again?" "Jessica Williams." "Jessica," Melissa repeated the name slowly, as if tasting it. "And how many years of experience do you have in executive management?" The question was a trap. Jessica knew she didn't have the experience this position normally required, and Melissa knew it too. "I'm learning," Jessica answered honestly. "But I'm committed to doing a good job." Melissa smiled, but there was no warmth in the gesture. "I'm sure." She turned and walked into Robert's office without knocking, closing the door behind her. Jessica sat back down, her hands trembling. She could hear muffled voices through the door, Melissa's tone occasionally rising. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew she was being discussed. 15 minutes later, Robert came out with Melissa by his side. He was tense, his shoulders rigid. Melissa shot one last look at Jessica before leaving, and there was something in that look that sent a chill down Jessica's spine. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was interest, curiosity, as if Melissa had just found an intriguing puzzle and was determined to solve it. At the end of the day, when Jessica finally got home, Lauren was waiting anxiously. They were still living in the same rundown apartment, but Robert had paid the 3 months of back rent and given them a 2-month advance. The landlord had gone quiet, but his expression said he still didn't believe their change in fortune. "How was it, Mum?" Lauren asked, hugging Jessica as soon as she walked in. "It was hard," Jessica admitted, sinking into the only chair they had. "But I survived." "Was Mr. Caldwell nice to you?" "He was professional." Jessica didn't know how to explain the complexity of the situation to her daughter. How could she say that Robert treated her with a distant kindness, as if she were an obligation he had to fulfill? How could she explain that every look from him brought back memories of a past she'd rather forget? That night, Jessica barely slept. She thought about Melissa, about the way the woman had looked at her, the suspicion evident in her eyes. She thought about the other employees, the veiled hostility, the way they made her feel like she didn't belong in their world. And she thought about Robert, the man he had become, so different from the boy she had loved 15 years ago. What Jessica didn't know was that, at that very moment, Melissa Caldwell was sitting in the living room of her mansion, a glass of wine in her hand, her laptop open before her. She had typed the name Jessica Williams into Google and several private databases her wealthy family had access to, and she was finding things. Not much, but enough to confirm her suspicions. Jessica Williams had lived in the same neighborhood as Robert when he was young. There was an old photo on a deactivated social media profile from 15 years ago showing the two of them together at a party. The photo had been quickly deleted, but the internet never truly forgets. Melissa clicked on more links, her expression hardening with each new discovery. And when she found a post on an old forum, a random comment from an acquaintance of Jessica's from years ago mentioning that she had disappeared after her rich boyfriend left her pregnant, Melissa felt something cold settle in her chest. She picked up her phone and dialed a private number, a private investigator her family had used for years. "I need you to investigate someone for me," she said, her voice calm, but with a sharp edge. "I want to know everything, where she lives, who she lives with, her complete history. And most importantly, I want to know if she has any connection to my husband beyond work." She hung up and took another sip of wine, looking at the wedding photo on the wall. Robert was smiling in the picture, young and confident. Melissa was smiling too, but now, sitting alone in that enormous room, she wondered how many other lies were hidden behind that smile. And in her cramped apartment, Jessica woke up in the middle of the night with a racing heart, drenched in a cold sweat. She'd had a nightmare where everything fell apart, where Robert fired her, where Lauren was taken away by Child Protective Services. But the worst part of the nightmare wasn't that. The worst part was the feeling that it wasn't just a dream. It was a warning, something was about to explode, and she had no idea how to stop it. 2 weeks later, Jessica's life had found a fragile rhythm. She woke up at 5, got Lauren ready for school, took 2 buses to Midtown, and always arrived at the office 15 minutes early. She learned to use the systems, to screen important calls, to anticipate what Robert needed before he even asked. But the hostility around her didn't lessen. If anything, it got worse. It was on a Tuesday that everything started to fall apart. Jessica was organizing documents when Catherine appeared at her desk, accompanied by a man in a dark suit she didn't recognize. He was in his 50s with a serious face and a leather folder under his arm. "Jessica, this is Mark Vance, the company's internal auditor," Catherine said with icy formality. "He needs to ask you a few questions about your work processes. Standard procedure." Jessica felt her stomach clench. This was not standard procedure. She'd seen other assistants work there for years without ever being audited. "Of course," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Mark opened his folder and placed some papers on her desk. "Ms. Williams, we've noticed some irregularities in documents that you handled last week. Contracts were filed without the necessary signatures. Reports with incorrect data were sent to important clients." Jessica frowned. "That's impossible. I check everything 3 times before sending it out." "Are you sure?" Mark turned the papers toward her. "These documents have your user ID on them. They were processed through your account." She looked at the papers, her heart racing. They were indeed documents she had worked on. But the final versions were wrong. Numbers had been changed, clauses were missing. These were serious errors that could cost the company millions. "I didn't do this," Jessica insisted, but her voice was less confident than she wanted. "Someone must have changed them after I sent them." Catherine crossed her arms. "Are you suggesting someone sabotaged your work? Why? You're new here. Who would have a reason to do that?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Jessica had no answer, but she knew she had enemies there. She could feel the stares, the conversations that stopped when she walked in, the way some people treated her like an imposter. "I'll need to discuss this with Mr. Caldwell," Mark said, gathering the papers. "In the meantime, I suggest you be more careful with your work. Mistakes like these can have serious consequences." They left, leaving Jessica alone and trembling. She knew she hadn't made those mistakes. Someone had tampered with the documents after she had. But how could she prove it? Robert was in meetings all day, and when he finally returned to his office, it was already 6 in the evening. Jessica knocked on his door, her heart in her throat. "Come in," his tired voice called out. Robert was sitting behind his desk, loosening his tie, a stack of contracts in front of him. He looked up at Jessica and frowned at her expression. "What's wrong?" She told him about the audit, about the mistakes she hadn't made, about the veiled accusation. Robert listened in silence. but his face grew darker with every word. "I'll handle this," he said finally. "Someone is trying to hurt you." "Who? Why?" Robert hesitated, as if deciding how much he should reveal. "There are people here who didn't like your hiring, people who think you don't deserve this position. And there are also—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "There are those who might have other motives." Jessica understood. Melissa, or people acting on her orders. "I can leave," Jessica said quietly. "If my being here is causing problems, I can go. I don't want to ruin your life." "No," Robert stood up, his voice firm. "You're not leaving. I promised to help you, and I'm going to keep that promise. Leave it to me." But the words, however well-intentioned, sounded hollow. Jessica knew that Robert Caldwell's promises had an expiration date. She had learned that the hard way 15 years ago. That night when Jessica got home, she found Lauren crying on the kitchen floor. The girl's shirt was torn and she had a scratch on her arm. "Lauren, what happened?" Jessica knelt beside her daughter, checking the wound. "At school," Lauren sobbed. "The 5th-grade girls pushed me. They said horrible things about you, Mom." Jessica's heart went cold. "What things?" Lauren looked down, ashamed to repeat the words. That you're selling yourself to a rich man. That's why we have money now. Their moms work at the company. They heard the gossip and told their daughters." Jessica felt a rage so intense her hands shook. It wasn't enough for them to humiliate her at work. Now they were attacking her daughter, using a 9-year-old child to hurt her. She hugged Lauren tightly. "Don't listen to what they say. You know the truth. I work honestly for every penny I earn." But Lauren kept crying, and Jessica realized that words weren't enough. Her daughter was paying the price for a situation she didn't choose, for a past she didn't know, for decisions adults had made long before she was born. The next day, Jessica arrived at the office determined to hold her head high. But when she sat at her desk, she found an unmarked envelope. Inside were photos, old photos of her and Robert from when they were dating. One showed them kissing in a park. Another was from a party, their bodies close, their smiles full of passion. And beneath the photos, a handwritten note. "Does Mrs. Caldwell know her husband hired his ex-mistress? It would be a shame if these photos got to her, or worse, to the press." Jessica swallowed hard. It was blackmail. Someone had discovered the truth about her past with Robert and was using it as a weapon. She quickly put the photos away, but her hands were shaking so much she dropped her pen. When she bent down to pick it up, she saw she wasn't alone. Across the hall, Ashley, one of the more senior assistants, was watching her with a satisfied smirk. The next few hours were torture. Jessica tried to work, but she couldn't concentrate. Every move she made was being watched. Every mistake would be used against her. And now there was the threat of the photos, the possibility of a scandal that would destroy not only her life but Robert's and, worst of all, Lauren's. At lunchtime, Jessica left the building needing air. She went to a nearby park and sat on a bench, her head in her hands. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? She just wanted to work, to support her daughter, to live in peace. But it felt like the universe was conspiring against her. "Jessica?" She looked up and saw Robert standing in front of her. He must have followed her. "Show me what you received today," he said, his voice low but firm. "How did you know?" "I have cameras in the office. I saw you open the envelope. I saw your reaction." Jessica hesitated, but she took the photos out of her purse and handed them to him. Robert looked at them with a grim face, his jaw tight. "This is a crime," he said. "Blackmail. I'm going to find out who did this." "And then what?" Jessica asked, exhausted. "Even if you find out, the damage is done. People already know, Robert. They're already talking, and my daughter is suffering because of it." Robert put the photos in his pocket and sat next to her on the bench. For a moment they sat in silence, two ex-lovers separated by 15 years of hurt and regret. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for everything, for leaving you, for being a coward, for choosing money over you. And I'm even more sorry that in trying to fix things, I've only made them worse." Jessica looked at him, and for the first time since they had reconnected, she saw the man she had once loved. Not the cold billionaire, but the young man who had promised he would always be by her side. "You can't fix the past, Robert," she said. "No one can. But you can help me protect Lauren. She doesn't deserve to go through this." "I will protect her," Robert promised, "from anyone, including Melissa if I have to." The mention of his wife's name brought reality crashing back. They weren't alone in this story. There was a woman at home waiting for Robert, a woman who was starting to ask dangerous questions. When they returned to the office, Jessica was summoned to Catherine's office. The HR manager was serious, her arms crossed. "Jessica, I need to inform you that a formal investigation into your conduct has been opened. Until it's concluded, you will be temporarily reassigned to the archives, in the basement, away from the executive floor." It was a public humiliation. Everyone would know she had been demoted. "For how long?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. "Until we can prove you don't pose a risk to the company." Catherine handed her a box. "Collect your personal belongings. Someone will take you to your new station." Jessica took the box with shaky hands. She looked around and saw employees watching through the glass, some with pity, others with satisfaction. She was being made an example of. A poor woman who dared to enter a world that wasn't hers was being put in her place. But the worst was yet to come. Because at that moment, in the building's parking garage, Melissa Caldwell was opening a report her private investigator had delivered. And on the first page, in bold letters, it read, "Jessica Williams, unregistered child, age 9 years." Melissa read every line, every detail, every piece of evidence that connected this woman to her husband's past. And when she finished, she picked up her phone and made a call. "I need to schedule a meeting with my lawyer," she said, her voice calm but icy. "It's about the divorce." The basement of Caldwell Development was a labyrinth of metal shelves filled with archive boxes. The lighting was dim, the air smelled of old paper and mildew, and the silence was broken only by the constant hum of the ventilation system. Jessica spent her days cataloguing old documents, alone at a rusty metal desk in the farthest corner. It was an exile. Everyone knew it. She didn't see Robert anymore. She didn't go up to the executive floor. Her meals were eaten in a small break room in the basement, separate from the main one where only maintenance. His staff and archivists ate. Conversations were scarce, the looks filled with poorly disguised curiosity. The story of her downfall had spread through the building like wildfire. A week after being transferred, Jessica received a text from an unknown number. "He's not going to save you. He's never saved anyone but himself." She deleted the message, but the words echoed in her mind. Were they true? Robert had promised to protect her, but where was he now? Why wasn't he fighting for her? The answer was obvious, because he had a life to protect, an empire to preserve, a wife who now knew too much. At home, the situation was no better. Lauren had been hastily moved to a new public school, far from their old neighborhood, but the problems followed her. Kids were cruel, especially when they smelled weakness. Lauren started coming home quiet, her eyes red from crying in the school bathroom. She didn't talk about what was happening anymore, but Jessica saw the signs. A torn notebook, a stomped-on lunch, clothes stained with dirt. "Mom, can we go back to how it was before?" Lauren asked one night, lying on the thin mattress they shared. When it was just us before all this. Jessica hugged her daughter, feeling her heart break. "I wish we could, sweetie, but we can't turn back time." "Then can we go somewhere else, far away from here?" The question was simple, but it carried an enormous weight. To run would be to admit defeat. It would be letting the powerful win. But staying meant continuing to fight a battle that seemed impossible to win. It was the following Monday that Robert finally came down to the basement. Jessica was organizing construction contracts from 10 years ago when she heard footsteps echoing down the hall. She looked up and saw him, standing at the entrance to the archives, his impeccable suit a stark contrast to the grime around them. "We need to talk," he said. Jessica looked around, checking if they were alone, and followed Robert to an empty meeting room on the ground floor. When the door closed, the silence between them was thick. "Melissa knows," Robert said without preamble, "about us, about our past. She hired an investigator and found out everything." Jessica felt the floor disappear from under her. And now? She's filing for divorce, and she wants half of everything. Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she recognized from years ago. "But that's not all. She's threatening to go public with our past relationship, to say you're my mistress, that Lauren is—" He stopped, as if he couldn't finish the sentence. "That Lauren is your daughter," Jessica completed, her voice bitter. "Even though it's not true." "Exactly. And if she does that, it will destroy you, destroy Lauren, destroy everything." "Why are you telling me this?" Jessica asked, exhausted. "What do you want me to do?" Robert looked her in the eyes for the first time since they'd entered the room. "I want you to take the money and disappear. Take Lauren, go to another state, start over. Far from here, far from me, far from this whole mess." The words landed like bricks. Jessica laughed, but it was a joyless sound. "You're paying me to disappear again." She shook her head, incredulous. 15 years later, and you're doing the exact same thing, discarding me like I'm a problem that can be solved with money." "It's not like that," Robert insisted. "I'm trying to protect you." "Liar, you're protecting yourself like you always have." Jessica stood up, her anger finally overcoming her exhaustion. "You know what's funny? I thought you had changed. I thought 20 years of success had given you some courage, some honor. But you're still the same coward you've always been." "Jessica, please." "No, don't you get it? I can't run. Lauren is 9 years old. She needs stability, a school, friends. I can't keep dragging her from city to city because you don't have the guts to face your own choices." Robert fell silent, and Jessica saw something break inside him. But she didn't care anymore. She was tired of being the one who carried the weight of other people's bad decisions. "I'm leaving the company," Jessica said finally. "I'm going to quit. You don't have to pay me anything. I just want you to leave me alone." "And how will you survive?" "The same way I've survived for the last 9 years, by working, by fighting, by doing whatever it takes." She walked to the door, but stopped before leaving. "You know the difference between us, Robert. When I had to choose between money and my daughter, I chose her. Without hesitation. You've never done that. And you never will." She left, leaving Robert alone in the room. He stood there for long minutes looking at his own hands, the hands that had built an empire but had never managed to hold on to what really mattered. Jessica went up to the Human Resources Department. Catherine was in her office working on her computer. When she saw Jessica at the door, her expression hardened. "I'm here to resign," Jessica said. Catherine blinked, surprised. "Resign? But the investigation isn't over." "It doesn't matter, I want out." "You know that if you resign now, you forfeit all your severance benefits, right? You won't get anything beyond what you've already worked." "I know." Catherine studied Jessica for a moment, and for the first time there was something different in her eyes. It wasn't exactly sympathy, but perhaps a glimmer of respect. "May I ask why?" "Because it's not worth it," Jessica replied. "This place, these people, this whole situation, it's not worth what it's costing me and my daughter." Catherine nodded slowly. "I'll prepare the paperwork. You can sign it tomorrow and be gone by Friday." When Jessica left the building for the last time as an employee, she felt a strange sense of relief, as if she had dropped a weight she had been carrying for weeks. But the relief was short-lived, because when she got home, she found Lauren sitting on the front stoop, crying. "Lauren? What's wrong? Why aren't you at school?" "They sent me home early," the girl sobbed. "The principal called you, but you didn't answer. She said she needs to talk to you tomorrow." Jessica's heart tightened. "Why did they send you home? What happened?" Lauren showed her the phone. On the screen was a picture of herself with text underneath, "Daughter of the whore, who works for Caldwell. Watch out, poverty is contagious." Jessica felt a wave of nausea. Someone had spread that all over the school. Kids could be cruel, but this came from adults, from parents who worked at the company, who heard the gossip and decided to target a 9-year-old girl. "Mom, is it true?" Lauren asked in a tiny voice. "Are you... what they're saying?" "No!" Jessica hugged her daughter fiercely. "Never. I work an honest job, I always have. People are making up lies because they're scared, because they're cruel, because they can." But Lauren kept crying, and Jessica knew that words weren't enough. The damage was done. Her daughter had been branded, publicly humiliated, for something she had no control over. That night, Jessica barely slept. She thought about everything that had happened since Lauren delivered that letter. The hope she'd felt when Robert promised to help, the illusion that maybe they could have a better life, and now the harsh reality that some battles can't be won when your opponent has so much more power. The next morning, Jessica went to the school for the meeting with the principal. The woman was older, with a serious but not unkind face. "Ms. Williams, unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask that you transfer Lauren again," the principal said, her tone professional but not without compassion. "The situation has become untenable. The other parents are calling, complaining, demanding action, and Lauren is suffering immensely. Yesterday I found her crying in a bathroom stall during recess." "Where am I supposed to take her?" Jessica asked, her voice breaking. "This is the second school. People always find out, they always follow us. Perhaps it would be best to leave the city for a while. Let things cool down." There it was, again, the suggestion to run, as if it were the only solution. Jessica left the school, defeated. But when she got home, there was an envelope under the door. Inside was a check from Robert Caldwell, for an amount that would let any middle-class person live comfortably for 2 years, and a note. "This isn't to buy you off, it's to give you choices. Use it however you want. But please, use it to protect Lauren. She doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes. R.C." Jessica held the check with trembling hands. It was tempting. It would be so easy to take that money, leave, and start over somewhere no one knew them. But it would also be an admission of guilt. It would be confirming to Lauren that they needed to hide, that they were weak, that they didn't deserve to be there. She looked at her daughter, who was sleeping exhaustedly on the mattress, her face still streaked with tears. And she made a decision. The next day, Jessica scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, not to sue Robert, but to sue the company for workplace harassment and persecution. She had proof, texts, witnesses, altered documents, and she was going to use all of it. Because if she was going down, she wasn't going down alone, and she wasn't going down quietly. The lawyer's office was in an old building downtown, 3 floors above a hardware store. Dr. Stephen Cole was 60, with white hair and a solid reputation for defending workers against large corporations. Jessica had found his name through an acquaintance who worked as a cleaner and had sued her former boss for unpaid wages. "Ms. Williams," Dr. Cole greeted her, gesturing to the chair in front of him. "Tell me your story. Everything. From the beginning." Jessica took a deep breath and told him about the letter Lauren delivered, about the job Robert offered, about the harassment at the office, the sabotage documents, the anonymous messages, Lauren's humiliation at school. She didn't mention her past relationship with Robert, only that he had known her from a long time ago and wanted to help. Dr. Cole listened in silence, jotting down key points. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "You have a strong case for workplace harassment and persecution. The messages, the unjustified transfer, the alteration of documents to frame you. That's all illegal." He paused. "But I have to be honest. Suing Caldwell Development is going to war with one of the most powerful men in New York. They have excellent lawyers, unlimited resources, and they won't make it easy." "I know," Jessica said, "but I can't let this go. Not for me, but for my daughter. She needs to see that we fight when it's the right thing to do." Dr. Cole smiled faintly. "Then let's fight. I'll need all the evidence you have. Texts, emails, names of witnesses, everything." Jessica handed him a folder she had prepared. Inside were screenshots of messages, copies of the altered documents, even recordings of conversations where colleagues made derogatory comments. She had saved everything, anticipating she might need it. Dr. Cole flipped through the material, his expression growing more serious with each page. "This is gold," he murmured. "With this, we can make some noise. A lot of noise." 3 days later, the legal notice arrived at Caldwell Development. Jessica Williams was filing a lawsuit for emotional distress, harassment, and persecution, seeking $500,000 in damages and demanding an internal investigation into abusive practices at the company. The news spread through the building like an electric shock. Employees whispered in the hallways. Catherine was urgently summoned to Robert's office, and Melissa, still living in the mansion while their lawyers prepared the divorce, got a call from her best friend who worked in the company's legal department. "You need to see this," her friend said. "That woman, Jessica, is suing the company, and the evidence she has is damning." Melissa read the initial petition her friend emailed her. Her face grew red with anger with each paragraph. This wasn't just a labor dispute. It was a bomb that could blow up the entire company's reputation. If this went public, if the press found out that an employee had been systematically harassed, the company's stock would plummet, contracts could be cancelled, and the Caldwell name would be dragged through the mud. She picked up the phone and called Robert's number. He answered on the third ring. "We need to talk, now," Melissa said, her voice icy. "I'm in a meeting." "I don't care. It's about your little friend. She's suing the company." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Melissa could almost hear Robert's thoughts crashing together. "I'll come down. Meet me in the garage in 10 minutes. When Robert arrived in the parking garage, Melissa was already leaning against her imported car, her arms crossed. She threw a copy of the petition at his chest. $500,000, she said. "That's what your charity case is asking for, plus an investigation that will dig into every dirty corner of this company." Robert read it quickly, his face paling. "She shouldn't have done this." "Shouldn't have." Melissa laughed, but it was a cruel sound. "You hired her without qualifications, started gossip that destroyed her reputation, and now you're surprised she's fighting back. Did you really think she'd just take it?" "I was trying to help." "Help?" Melissa stepped closer, her finger pointed at him. "You brought your dirty past into our company, into our life. And now it's going to blow up in our faces, or rather in your face, because when this goes public, when the press finds out that the great Robert Caldwell hired an ex-girlfriend and treated her like trash, guess who's going to pay the price?" Robert put the petition in his pocket. "I'll handle it." "How? By offering more money, making more empty promises?" Melissa shook her head. "You know what's going to happen. My lawyers will use this in the divorce. They'll argue that you caused financial and reputational damage to the family business I helped build, and they'll get me not half but 3/4 of everything." She got in her car and rolled down the window before driving off. "And you know what's funniest? You could have avoided all of this. If you had been honest with me 15 years ago, if you hadn't brought her back, if you had just left the past where it belonged. But you couldn't, and now everyone is going to pay." The car sped away, leaving Robert alone in the empty garage. He pulled out his phone and called Dr. Stephen Cole. "Dr. Cole? This is Robert Caldwell. I understand you're representing Ms. Jessica Williams in a suit against my company." "Mr. Caldwell?" The lawyer's voice was professional but firm. "Yes, I am. And before you ask, no, she is not interested in a settlement. Everyone has a price. My client doesn't." There was a pause. "But I can pass along a message if you'd like." Robert hesitated. Tell her I'm sorry. For everything. And that I understand why she's doing this." "I'll pass it on. But honestly, Mr. Caldwell, I think she already knows." The call ended. Robert stood there, looking up at the building he had worked so hard to build, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt like he was losing control of everything. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Jessica was trying to explain to Lauren what was happening. "Mom, what's a lawsuit?" the girl asked, sitting on the floor with a sketchbook in her lap. "It's when someone does something wrong to you, and you ask the court for help to make it right." "And you did that?" "I did, because the people at Mr. Caldwell's company treated me badly. And that's not right." Lauren drew in silence for a few minutes, then looked up. "Is everything going to be okay?" Jessica wanted to say yes, that everything would be fine, that they would finally have peace, but she couldn't lie to her daughter. "I don't know, sweetie, but I'm fighting, and sometimes fighting is enough." The next morning, Jessica woke up to her phone ringing. It was an unknown number, she answered cautiously. Jessica Williams, a male voice asked. Yes? My name is Paul Fisher. I'm a reporter with the New York Chronicle. I received an anonymous tip about a lawsuit involving Caldwell Development, and I'd like to get your side of the story. Jessica's heart stopped. The press. Someone had leaked the information to the press. I can't talk about that, she stammered. I understand it's sensitive. But my source claims there was systematic harassment, document sabotage, and even threats against your minor daughter. If that's true, it's a matter of public interest. Who gave you this information? I can't reveal my source, but I can guarantee I'll protect your identity if you choose to speak. Jessica hung up, her hands shaking. She immediately called Dr. Cole. The press knows, she said as soon as he answered. A reporter just called me. Dr. Cole swore under his breath. Someone leaked it. Could be from the company trying to control the narrative before it blows up, or it could be someone trying to hurt Caldwell. What do I do? Don't talk to the press. Not yet. Leave it to me. But it was too late. That same afternoon, the newspaper's website published a story. Former employee accuses real estate giant of harassment and persecution. Company denies, but documents suggest sabotage. The article didn't name names, but anyone close to the situation would know who it was about. And in New York, in a small and gossipy business circle, everyone was close to the situation. Jessica's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers, WhatsApp messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting to know if it was true, if she was really suing Robert Caldwell, if there was something more between them. She turned off her phone and hugged Lauren, who was scared by all the commotion. Mom, why are so many people calling? Because grown-ups love gossip, sweetie, but you don't need to worry. But Jessica was worried, very worried, because she knew that when you poke an empire, the empire pokes back, and usually with much more force. That night, Robert Caldwell sat alone in his top-floor office, the city lights twinkling through the windows. He was holding a glass of scotch he had already refilled 3 times, and he stared at the phone on his desk. There was a decision he had to make. A decision that would change everything. He could fight Jessica, use all his power and money to crush her lawsuit, make an example of her for daring to challenge the powerful, or he could do the right thing for the first time in 15 years. Robert picked up the phone and dialed a number. When the person answered, he said just 4 words that no one expected to hear. I want to confess. Robert Caldwell's confession was made at an impromptu press conference the next morning. He summoned the city's major newspapers. His lawyers tried to talk him out of it. Melissa called furiously, demanding he stop this madness. But he didn't listen to anyone. For the first time in decades, Robert Caldwell was doing something without calculating the consequences. Jessica watched on television, Lauren by her side. When Robert appeared on the screen, pale but determined, Jessica felt her stomach clench. Good morning, everyone, Robert began, his voice steady despite his visible nervousness. I've called this press conference to address the allegations made against my company by Ms. Jessica Williams, and to say that she is right. An immediate murmur filled the room. Reporters stirred, cameras flashed. Robert held up a hand for silence. Jessica Williams was hired by me personally, without going through the normal selection process. I did this because I knew her from the past, because I knew she and her daughter were in a difficult situation, and because I thought I could help. But in doing so, I created a hostile environment for her. Other employees saw her as someone who didn't deserve to be there, and I, by failing to protect her properly, allowed her to be harassed. Mr. Caldwell, a reporter shouted, are you admitting guilt? I am admitting responsibility, as the owner of the company, as the person who made the decision to hire her. I am responsible for everything that happened afterward, and I will do whatever it takes to compensate her. And your wife? How does she feel about this? Robert hesitated for a fraction of a second. My wife and I are separating, for reasons unrelated to this case. But everyone knew they were related. The press wasn't stupid. When the press conference ended, Jessica's phone rang. It was Dr. Cole. Did you see it? He asked, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. I saw. This changes everything. He's practically admitted public guilt. Any judge who gets this case will rule in your favor, but it also means he's throwing everything away. His company will suffer, his stock will plummet, there could even be federal investigations. Is that my problem? Jessica asked, but her voice was less confident than she wanted. No, but I thought you should know. In the days that followed, all hell broke loose in Robert Caldwell's life. The company's stock dropped 20% in 2 days. 3 major clients cancelled their contracts, citing ethical concerns. The board of directors called an emergency meeting, demanding an explanation. And Melissa, through her lawyers, sent a letter stating she would be seeking not half, but 70% of their assets in the divorce, claiming Robert had caused irreparable financial damage to the company they built together. But the numbers weren't the worst part. The worst part was the looks. The people who once greeted him with reverence now avoided him in the hallways. Employees who had worked at the company for years started resigning, afraid the ship was sinking. And the newspapers couldn't stop speculating about the real relationship between him and Jessica. Secret love from the past? One headline asked. Billionaire ruins empire for ex-girlfriend, said another. Robert endured it all in silence. But there was one thing he needed to do before it was too late. It was on a Thursday afternoon that he showed up at Jessica's apartment. She opened the door and was shocked to see him there, standing on the cracked sidewalk, his expensive suit completely out of place in that scene of poverty. "What are you doing here?" she asked, looking around to see if anyone had noticed. The last thing she needed was more gossip. "I needed to talk to you in person." Jessica hesitated but let him in. Robert looked around the tiny apartment, the concrete floor, the thin walls, the old furniture. This was where Jessica had lived all this time, while he lived in a 5-story mansion. "Is Lauren here?" he asked. "She's at a neighbor's. I thought it was better for her not to be alone after everything that's happened." Robert nodded and sat in the only available chair. Jessica remained standing, her arms crossed. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "The public confession. You destroyed everything." "Because it was the right thing to do. Because I spent 15 years running from the consequences of my choices, and it was time to stop." He looked at her. "And because you deserved it. I didn't ask for that. I didn't ask you to sacrifice yourself." "It wasn't a sacrifice. It was justice." Robert took an envelope from his pocket. "I came to bring you this. It's the settlement my lawyers prepared. $500,000 in damages, plus a monthly child support payment for Lauren until she turns 18. And a letter of recommendation signed by me for any job you want." Jessica took the envelope with trembling hands. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of having. "Why?" she asked. "Why now? Why not 15 years ago?" Robert closed his eyes. "Because 15 years ago, I was a coward. I chose security, money, the approval of Melissa's family. I chose the easy way out, and I spent the last 15 years building an empire that meant nothing, because it was built on lies and cowardice. And now? You've found your conscience? No. Now I've found that I can't live with myself anymore." He stood up. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to understand. I just hope you'll accept this and use it to give Lauren the life she deserves." Jessica looked at the envelope, then at Robert. There was so much she wanted to say, so much pent-up anger, so much resentment. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was different from what she expected. "You ruined your life for me?" "No. I ruined the lies I was living. My real life is just beginning." He walked to the door, but Jessica called out to him. "Robert," he turned. "You're not the man I loved 15 years ago, but you're not the coward who abandoned me either. I don't know who you are now." Robert smiled sadly. "Neither do I. But I'm finding out." After he left, Jessica opened the envelope and read the agreement. It was all there, detailed, legal, irrefutable. It was more than she had asked for in the lawsuit. It was freedom. She picked up the phone and called Dr. Cole. "Did you get the offer?" he asked. "I did, and I'm going to accept it." "Are you sure? We could ask for more." With his public confession, we have all the leverage. No, this is enough, more than enough. Dr. Cole was silent for a moment. You're a rare woman, Jessica Williams. Most people would want to squeeze him for every last drop. I'm not like most people. When Lauren came home, Jessica sat her down and explained everything. That the lawsuit was over. That they had won. That now they would have enough money to truly start over. Can we move? Lauren asked, her eyes shining. We can. We can go wherever you want. And can I go back to my old school? Jessica hesitated. The old school was where everything had started to fall apart, but it was also where Lauren had friends, where she felt at home before it all became a nightmare. We can try, but if things get bad again, we'll move, okay? Lauren hugged her mother tightly. Thank you, Mom, for fighting. That night, Jessica slept better than she had in months, but her sleep was interrupted by a call at 3 in the morning. It was an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press the green button. Hello? Jessica Williams? A female voice asked. There was something familiar about it. Yes, who is this? Melissa Caldwell. We need to talk. Jessica's heart raced. About what? About my ex-husband, and about a truth he never told you. There was a heavy pause. A truth about your daughter. Jessica sat up in bed, wide awake now. What do you mean? I can't talk over the phone. Meet me tomorrow. Breakfast at the Standard, 9 o'clock. Alone. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, you'll spend the rest of your life not knowing who Lauren's real father is. And believe me, you're going to want to know. The call ended. Jessica sat in the darkness, the phone still in her hand, her heart pounding. What did Melissa know? And why was she revealing it now? But the question that terrified her most was another one. What if Lauren wasn't the daughter of the man Jessica always thought she was? What if the entire story she had told herself for the last 9 years was a lie? The Standard Hotel was everything its name promised. Modern, expensive, frequented by New York's elite. Jessica felt out of place again, but this time the feeling was different. She was no longer the poor girl begging for help. She was a woman who had fought and won, who had a right to be there. Melissa was already sitting at a discreet table in the restaurant, wearing an elegant black dress and sunglasses despite being indoors. She looked thinner, more fragile than Jessica remembered. The divorce was taking its toll. Jessica, Melissa said, standing as she approached. Thank you for coming. They sat in silence. Melissa ordered black coffee. Jessica, water. What do you want? Jessica asked directly. First, I want to apologize. Melissa took off her sunglasses, revealing red, tired eyes. For everything you went through at the company. I knew what was happening. I didn't order it, but I didn't stop it either. And now you have a guilty conscience? Now I understand a lot of things. Melissa opened a folder that was beside her. During the investigation for the divorce, I discovered truths that Robert hid from me, and from you. She placed some papers on the table. Jessica recognized them as medical exams, lab reports. Robert is sterile, Melissa said simply. He was diagnosed 20 years ago. After a poorly treated infection in his teens, I found this out while trying to understand why we could never have children. He always said it was my problem, that I should get more tests, more treatments. But the problem was his. Jessica frowned, not understanding where this was going. He never told me, Melissa continued. He let me blame myself for years. Let me undergo dozens of painful and humiliating procedures, trying to get pregnant by a man who knew it was impossible. And you know what's crueler? He pretended he didn't know. What does this have to do with me? Melissa smiled bitterly. Lauren was conceived when you were still with Robert, right? Not after you broke up like you always said. Jessica's heart stopped. That's none of your business. Robert can't be her biological father. It's impossible. But for all these years, he believed he could be. That's why he felt so guilty when you disappeared pregnant. That's why he helped you now. He thinks he abandoned his own daughter. You're lying. I'm telling the truth no one wants to hear. Melissa pushed the exams toward Jessica. These reports prove it. Robert Caldwell can't have children, he never could. Jessica looked at the papers, the words dancing, in front of her. So why are you telling me this? Because I deserve my revenge, on him and on you. Melissa's veneer of civility began to crack. He destroyed my marriage over a guilt that didn't even exist. He lost everything for a daughter who isn't even his, and you accepted his help knowing it was based on a lie. I didn't know that, didn't you? Then who is Lauren's father, Jessica? Because it can't be Robert. The silence stretched between them. Jessica felt nauseous, dizzy. The memories she had buried 9 years ago were resurfacing like punctured balloons, rising from dark water. She began, but her voice failed. I researched your entire life, Melissa said, relentless. I found out about Brian, your ex-fiancé who died in a motorcycle accident 2 months after you broke up. Lauren was conceived in the last few weeks of your relationship, wasn't she, when you were already seeing Robert, but still sometimes sleeping with Brian? The tears came without warning. Jessica tried to wipe them away, but they wouldn't stop. You were never sure who the father was, Melissa continued, her voice softer now, but when you found out you were pregnant, Robert was already engaged to me. So it was easier to pretend you got pregnant after you broke up. It was easier to let him believe he could be the father, even without being sure. Stop, Jessica whispered. The truth is, Lauren is probably Brian's daughter, the daughter of the man you really loved but who died before he knew he was going to be a father. Jessica stood up, stumbling. Why are you doing this to me? Because I want Robert to know. I want him to understand that he lost everything for nothing, that he destroyed our marriage, our company, our life, for a non-existent guilt. And Lauren? You want a 9-year-old child to know that everything she believes about herself is a lie? Melissa hesitated for the first time. That's up to you. Jessica grabbed her purse, trembling. You're a monster, worse than Robert ever was. She ran out of the hotel, leaving Melissa alone with the papers scattered on the table. In the cab home, Jessica cried like she hadn't cried since the day she learned Brian had died. Because Melissa was right, about everything. Lauren was probably Brian's daughter. Jessica had always known there. Was a possibility, but it was easier to bury the doubt than to face the truth. Brian was dead, Robert was alive and rich, and a child needed a father, even if it was just an illusion. When she got home, Lauren was drawing at the kitchen table. She looked up and immediately knew something was wrong. Mom, why are you crying? Jessica knelt beside her daughter and hugged her tightly. Lauren, I need to tell you something. About your dad. Mr. Caldwell? No. About your real dad. Jessica took a deep breath. Remember how I always said your dad... I left before you were born? Lauren nodded. That was true, but it wasn't Mr. Caldwell. It was another man. A very good man, named Brian, who would have loved you so much if he were still alive. He died. He did. When you were still in my tummy. In an accident. Lauren was silent for a moment, processing. And Mr. Caldwell? Mr. Caldwell helped us because he thought he might be your dad, but he's not. He's just a good man who wanted to do the right thing. So, I don't have a dad? You do. You did. Brian loved you before you were even born. And even though he's not here, that love didn't die. Lauren looked at the drawing she was making. It was a house with 2 figures at the door, her and Jessica. Okay, she said finally. It's always been just us anyway. The simplicity of Lauren's acceptance broke something inside Jessica. She laughed through her tears. Yes, it always has been, and it always will be. That afternoon, Jessica called Robert. He answered on the first ring. Jessica, we need to talk. In person. Did something happen? Melissa found me. She told me about you being sterile. There was a long pause. When Robert spoke again, his voice was broken. She shouldn't have done that. But she did. And now we need to decide what to do with this information. They met in the same park where they used to date 15 years ago. Robert looked different, thinner with more grey hair, but there was a lightness about him that wasn't there before. "Did you always know?" Jessica asked as soon as they sat on the bench. "About being sterile?" "I found out 2 months ago when Melissa used it in the divorce until... Then I thought," he laughed humorlessly, "I thought you had hidden my daughter from me for 9 years. And how do you feel knowing Lauren isn't yours?" Robert was silent for a long time. "Relieved," he said finally. "And sad, but mostly relieved." "Why?" "Because it means I didn't abandon my daughter. It means my guilt, at least that part of it, didn't exist." He looked at her. "But it also means I helped you for the wrong reasons." "No, you helped me for the right reasons. You just didn't know it at the time." Robert smiled for the first time in weeks. "And now? What do we do?" "Now we live with the truth. Lauren knows about her father. She knows you're not her biological dad, but that you were the man who helped us when we needed it. And that's enough. Can I still be a part of your lives? As a friend, not a father?" Jessica considered it. "Lauren will decide that. But I think she'd like that." 6 months later, Jessica and Lauren moved into a small but comfortable house in a middle-class neighborhood in Queens. Lauren went back to a good school, made new friends, and smiled again. The settlement money was invested well, with the help of an honest financial advisor Dr. Cole had recommended. Robert visited once a month. He brought books for Lauren, talked with Jessica about trivial things, and left without pushing for more. He had sold a large part of his company, paid off all his divorce debts, and now worked as a consultant, earning less but sleeping better. Melissa had disappeared. Rumors said she had moved to Miami, others that she was in Paris. Robert never asked about her. It was the day before Lauren's 10th birthday, when Jessica finally visited Brian's grave. She had kept a box for 9 years, filled with photos and letters she never had the courage to show her daughter. "Hi, Brian," she said, kneeling on the grass. "I have some news. Your daughter is doing great. She's beautiful, smart, brave. She has your eyes, and your stubborn way of not giving up on things." The wind rustled the flowers she had brought. "She wants to know more about you. I'm going to show her the pictures, tell her the stories. She deserves to know who her father was, her real father." When she got home, Lauren was waiting for her with a cake she had tried to make herself. It was lopsided and a little burnt, but the girl's smile was perfect. "Surprise! I thought we could celebrate." "Celebrate what?" "The fact that we're here, together, after everything." Jessica hugged her daughter, feeling a gratitude so deep it almost hurt. "Mom," Lauren said, pulling back a little, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Do you regret it? Delivering that letter?" Jessica thought about the question. She thought about everything that had happened since that day. The humiliation, the harassment, the tears, the fear. But she also thought about the house they were in now, the good school Lauren attended, the freedom from worrying about utility bills, from having to split a plate of food. "No," she said, "I don't regret it, because it's what brought us here." "To where?" "Home. Finally home." Outside, New York City was still New York City, loud, unfair, cruel to the weak and generous to the strong. But in the small world that Jessica and Lauren had built, there was peace, there was dignity, and there was something no billionaire can buy and no persecution can take away. The unconditional love between a mother and a daughter, who learned that sometimes the courage to deliver a letter can change everything. And when Lauren grew up, when she asked how 2 people could beat such a powerful system, Jessica would tell her they didn't win alone. They won because there was a moment when a powerful man chose to do the right thing, even if it cost him everything. And they won because, in the end, the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. The sun set over the city, painting everything gold. And in the small house in Queens, a mother and daughter celebrated the best kind of victory, the kind that lets you sleep peacefully, knowing you fought with honor, even when the whole world was against you.